This video is brought to you by Squarespace. From websites and online stores to marketing tools and analytics, Squarespace is the all-in-one platform to build a beautiful online presence and run your business. Anton Mauve was a Dutch realist painter and a member of the Hague School. He was known for his brilliant and delicate palette as well as his commitment to realism. In addition, Mauve was married to Vincent van Gogh's cousin and was a profound influence on the young painter. Van Gogh spent several weeks at Mauve's studio, where Mauve encouraged, mentored, and loaned the young artist money to build his own studio. Unfortunately, their relationship came to a tumultuous end, as Mauve described Vincent van Gogh as having a vicious character. Nonetheless, Vincent continued to hold Mauve in very high esteem and in fact dedicated one of his most famous paintings to Mauve after his sudden death. Upon first glance, this lovely painting of a shepherd and her flock doesn't appear to be in poor condition at all. In fact, it looks rather good, and one wonders why it's even in the studio for conservation. But as we've come to know, things aren't always as they seem. Hey, so this is the point in the video where I would normally turn to the camera. I'd break that fourth wall, and I'd find some compelling, funny, creative, dad-jokey way of making a segue from the painting to the sponsor, in this case, Squarespace. And I might say something like, if you hand over your web presence to an app or another company, well, you're not going to stand out from the flock. If I was feeling really bold, I would say something like, shepherd your business's web presence into the future with Squarespace. And I'd tell you about how Squarespace is the simplest and easiest way to build a website. With one click, you can launch it, choose from thousands of beautifully designed, mobile-friendly templates that work everywhere. Add an e-commerce solution so you can sell things. Whether it's digital goods or tangible products, Squarespace has that covered. From front-end and making it look good, to back-end and handling payments and processing. Or add email marketing so that you can start to reach clients, customers, and people who are interested in what you have to share. And it's more than just an email blast that goes straight to spam. Squarespace has advanced analytics to help you target who you need to reach. And know that if and when you have questions, there's a robust community of users just like you to help out. And when you need more assistance, you can reach out to a real, live human being. I might even say, don't be sheepish. They're going to give you a full month free trial, so you've got nothing to lose. But I couldn't figure that good, funny segue out. Maybe I've lost my mojo. I'll tell you what, why don't you give me your pitch from this painting to Squarespace in the comments below. I figure by now, you folks are as good at this as I am. So head over to squarespace.com for a free trial, and when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/Baumgartner to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. One of the downsides of practicing any craft or trade for long enough is that the unbridled enthusiasm that one used to have often wanes. And such is the case with conservation. While I still love paintings and love experiencing them, I have this sixth sense that every painting arriving in the studio is a disaster waiting to reveal itself. And while I am sometimes pleasantly surprised, that sixth sense generally serves me well. And this painting is no exception. But before we get to that, I have to first remove it from the frame. And it's relatively easy with only 2 small screws holding it in place. One would think for such an important painting, in such a beautiful frame, a little bit more care would have been taken. WTF. So into the storage room we go. And this is where I keep my ultraviolet lights and a little easel so I can view paintings. This painting fits nicely, the lights are already set up for it, and when the lights go off and the UV lights go on, we can start to actually see this painting in a way that we can't with natural light, and we can start to understand, well, some of the WTF. Under ultraviolet light, we can start to see some of the most obvious retouching, here circled in red. These are areas of dark purple, almost black, that sit on the surface of the painting. And this can easily be identified as retouching because the paint is fluorescing. That's what happens when it comes into contact with ultraviolet light. This is fairly easy to see, and anybody who's worked in a gallery or auction house or looked at a lot of paintings under UV will recognize this as old retouching. This is not what we're concerned about. In light green, I'm going to start circling and highlighting the areas that I am concerned about. And it may, in fact, be easier to highlight areas I'm not concerned about because you can see that pretty much the entire sky is giving me pause. Though it is difficult to see even under ultraviolet light, that's all retouching. And to make matters worse, here in blue, I'm going to highlight the areas of old varnish that have never been removed. These look kind of greenish, yellowish, and that's just indicative that this painting was never properly cleaned in the first place. WTF is right. So now we know some of what's wrong with this painting. We can take a look at other things that are concerning. When I look at the back, I notice that this painting has been lined to a new canvas, and that means that it's been adhered to another piece of canvas. And in this case, it looks like it was done with wax, which is a traditional yet antiquated method of lining canvases. Now, lining canvases isn't inherently wrong. I do it, every conservator does it. But it needs to be applied only when necessary. And in those cases where there is a large tear, or the canvas is significantly weakened or deteriorated, or somehow compromised to the point where it can't manage to act as a stable structural support for the paint layer, then we line the canvas. Given that this painting was lined and that there is a lot of retouching in the sky, my early suspicions are that there was a tear, or hole, or multiples, and that's why it was lined and heavily overpainted. But in order to find that out, I have to first remove this painting from the support, and I have to pull out all of these little tacks. I suppose one of the nice things when pulling off a lining that's been done with wax is that the tacks come out fairly easily because they're coated with wax, and wax, when dry, is a release agent. Though this painting has no tacking edges, it seems that they were cut off. I'm still being careful to pry back the existing lining from the canvas. Always a good idea to work cautiously. The stretcher looks fine, and I'll save it for later, but for now, I have to deal with this wax lining. Over at the hot table, I've put down a piece of PET or mylar to make sure that the table stays clean, and I'm turning on the table and adjusting the temperature. One nice thing about wax is that it softens and melts under exposure to heat. So, with a little bit of time, once it's been warmed up, it's relatively easy to peel back this lining canvas. I mean, you can see it kind of comes right off, and lo and behold, no holes, no tears. But there is still a layer of wax. So using solvent and some cotton balls, and then some more cotton balls, and then some more solvent and more cotton balls, I will remove off all that residue. And you can see that the painting looks pretty good. There are some areas where there's some old paint and grime stuck to the back, and I'll scrape those off with a scalpel, but by and large, this canvas looks fine. I don't know why it was lined. Put that in the column of WTF for sure. Even though I have removed a lot of that wax, there is still some embedded in the canvas, and I want to remove all of that wax. So I'm transferring the painting over to a piece of blotter paper. And this is just acid-free recycled cotton blotter paper, and it's highly absorbent. And when I put this painting on, and I continue to heat the hot table up, put some release film on the face of the painting, create an evacuation route for the air that will inevitably be trapped in when I create the envelope with a new sheet of mylar, tape it all down, create an airtight seal with another layer of tape. This is critical because I want downward pressure, and if I don't create this airtight seal, well, I won't have downward pressure. Try not to burn my hands because the table is hot. Add the through extractor, turn off the heat, turn on the vacuum, extract all of that air, and press the painting into the blotter paper. The combination of the heat and pressure will allow any of that extra wax to melt into the blotter paper and out of the canvas. After about an hour and a half or so, once the table has cooled, I can remove all of this little envelope that I've made and remove the painting, and you can see that halo, that's all wax that's been extracted. With the lining and the wax removed, it's a perfect time to start dealing with the cleaning of the painting. I know that this painting has been heavily overpainted, multiple times in fact. I also know that there is old varnish on the painting. I've made some tests earlier before I started this work, and I found that there wasn't really enough surface grime for me to break this cleaning process up into 2 stages. I could start with a solvent that I had tested earlier that's safe on the painting, and start seeing what comes off. Almost instantly, retouching comes off. But this is good. This is really, really good. The fact that the retouching is all over the painting is concerning, of course, but the fact that it comes off is the saving grace. That means I will be able to remove all of this excessive overpainting. And you can see just how much there is. Look at the area that I've removed the painting. You can see the texture of the paint and the canvas. On the area just to the left of it, you see how smooth it is? Well, that was all overpainting. Overpainting is problematic not only because it could be the wrong color, because it could cover up some of the original, but because it does cover up little details, the subtle brushwork or impasto that the artist created. That all gets obliterated when there's heavy overpainting with oil paint. But as we remove it, you can start to see that the color wasn't quite right either. It's a little too dark, it's a little too yellow, and some of this very wispy little tree was just painted over. And this is not all that uncommon. Sometimes it's hard to be accurate when you're overpainting. In fact, when you're overpainting a large area like the sky, it's really hard to be accurate. And that's one reason we don't overpaint. Obviously, there's a whole bunch of other reasons, but that's just one of them. Now, I'm going to clean just a section of this painting, vertically on the right side, and use the tree as a delineator, because I want to go ahead and take a look at it under the blacklight after I've removed, a little less than half of the overpaint and old varnish. I'd like to show you just what it looks like under UV light. So once I have gotten that area completely clean, or what I hope is completely clean, I'm going to go back into the dark room and flick on those lights and see what we have. And as we take a look at the painting under UV light, we can see right off the bat that the part I've cleaned, well, it looks much better. All of that overpaint is gone, and we can see the real colors that the artist laid down, not what the conservator did. But more importantly, take a look at this right here that I'm about to circle. You see that? Now look at the left. It was completely overpainted. Part of the original was covered up. Back out in the front of the studio, I can now finish removing all of that overpaint. And I am optimistic because thus far, on the right half of the painting, we didn't find any damage that would warrant this type of excessive overpainting. Now, sometimes it is necessary to glaze in a painting. Imagine the whole sky was skinned or abraded with something like sandpaper, and there were lots of tiny, tiny little missing areas of paint. Well, you could certainly go and touch up each one, but that may actually not be plausible, in which case laying down a thin glaze would be acceptable, as long as it's reversible and on an isolation layer. But this is not that. You can see on the right hand, the sky is great. I mean, perfect. So it has me wondering why all of this overpaint was applied. And inevitably, I'm going to find out. And right off the bat, I find a tiny little hole. And I am feeling great, because that hole is so insignificant, so small, that I can fix it with my eyes closed. But of course, my optimism is short-lived, and I start to reveal the real reason the sky was overpainted. It looks like there was some pretty significant paint loss at some point. I don't know why, but even this amount of loss, even this extreme missing paint, would not warrant overpainting the entire sky. We know this as conservators. You, as the audience, know this. It's completely absurd to repaint the sky for, what is that? Maybe a tenth of the sky missing? As I go down through the rest of the painting, I reveal more damage. little areas of losses in the sheep and the shepherd's feet. But luckily, the rest of the painting looks pretty good. There's nothing catastrophically wrong. And I'm going over the signature last, and you'll notice that I'm using a different technique. I'm rolling the swab over the signature. Before, I was kind of dragging the swab and picking up all the overpaint, but here I'm just rolling it because signatures are often fugitive or delicate, and rolling is a bit safer. When I removed the old lining, I did notice that there was a small piece of canvas missing on the bottom edge of the painting. This was just filled in previously, and instead of repeating that, I'm going to use a little piece of canvas and make an inlay. This will be more structurally sound, and it will give a better support for the fill-in that I do put on the painting to deal with the slight paint loss. Once that canvas is traced from an old stock that I keep, I can cut it out with my scissors, and hopefully it will fit right into place. Yep, looks like it will do the trick. I'm going to secure this in place and address the small hole with bridging. Now, bridging is a technique whereby strands of Belgian linen are laid down perpendicularly across the tear or hole. Think of a surgeon stitching across a slice in skin. Except here, we're not sewing the canvas shut. We're just laying down these strips of linen across the area of damage to stabilize it, hold it down, and to provide something for the fill-in medium to stick to. I've cut all of these little strands, and then using a little tweezers, I dip them into an adhesive, and then using a small dental tool, I place them onto the canvas and move them into their final resting place. I'm going to offset these as I work because I don't want the tops and bottoms to be in a crisp line. It's a small detail, but it does matter. It helps offset the area of adhesion. And that can make a difference because if they were all aligned, maybe, and it's not always true, but maybe it would start to telegraph to the front. But that slight offset makes a big difference. Once they're in place, I'll put a piece of silicone release film and then felt on top and then put a weight on top. And then I just have to sit tight while it all dries over the period of about a day and a half or maybe 2, depending on the studio's humidity, how much bridging I've done, and if I have other things that need this spot on the table. But this is a small painting and it's relatively dry, so it should be fine in a day. Midway through the drying process, I removed the release layer of Mylar and then laid the felt directly on the bridging to give it a little bit more padding and to allow it to dry faster. And now that it's dry, I can start to deal with the missing tacking edges. I keep in my studio a lot of old materials, but I also keep cutoffs of adhesive film and canvas that were used in larger projects. Now, these are scraps, but of course scraps can be used if they fit the bill. And on small paintings like this, they do. They save me time, they save me money, and I feel good about not throwing things away. Now, I do need to clean out this bin of scrap adhesive film, but for now, we'll focus on the painting. This adhesive film is a thermoplastic adhesive, which means that it needs heat to activate, and effectively we are melting it onto the old canvas. There is a release layer on top of it, which makes sure that it doesn't stick to the iron. And once cool, I can peel that release layer off, and we have our adhesive. It was a little large, so I'm going to peel it up and fold it over, which isn't problematic in any way. It just gives me a little bit more adhesive and ensures that the bond is extra strong. Then I can take my piece of frayed Belgian linen, and the fray is similar to why I offset the bridging. I want a soft edge, and if I don't fray this, there's the possibility that the edge will telegraph to the front of the painting. While I'm ironing it down, I'm using a weight with a clapper on it, and that's just a piece of oak that will absorb the ambient moisture in the canvas. If I don't do this, the canvas is going to distort and wrinkle. I'll trim off the excess on the edge so that I don't have to deal with it later. And then I can start putting on the other piece of adhesive film and the other section of strip lining. It's important to line these things up, and I choose to overlap them as opposed to cutting them on a bevel because I want extra canvas in this corner. Corners on paintings are one of the most vulnerable areas because there is, well, a corner, and also that's where the stretcher keys out, so they're under more tension than the rest of the painting. So having two pieces of canvas, I have found, is a more secure way of ensuring that there's no tear or hole or other weakness. If I were to bevel these and have a seam in the corner, that would be weak, and that's not something that I want with my work. I want to make sure that this lasts and that it serves the painting as best as possible. So that's why I overlap it. Before I stretch the painting to its original support, I want to clean it up a bit because at some point in the past, a water-based adhesive paper tape was put all over everything. You saw me peel that off in the beginning, and it's left a grimy, gross mess. And, well, I want to deliver this painting back to the clients in a state better than when I received it. So I'm going to clean off all of that glue. I'm going to clean off all the dust and the dirt. I'm going to disassemble the stretcher and make sure that it is secure. And then I'm going to make new keys because these are broken and, well, there's not even enough of them. So I'm going to go over to my wood and trace one of the original ones. And then I'm going to go ahead and make some new ones. There is nothing terribly fancy about this work. And to some degree, this is really what conservation is about. A lot of small, meticulous, and sometimes tedious steps. But they all add up, much like bricks in a wall or castle. One by one, you start to see the fruits of all of your labor. And here, in this case, now I have a full set of keys. So nothing terribly exciting, but it makes a difference. And now I am ready to stretch this painting. It's a small piece, so it is relatively easy to stretch. Obviously, the smaller the painting is, the less I have to do. But once they get really, really small, they get really difficult to stretch. Anything smaller than this is a little bit more complicated, but this one is kind of a perfect size. Attack in the center of each edge, and then I'll just work around. And there is nothing special or fancy about this. It's relatively simple and straightforward. But again, it's one of those techniques that, if done well and done with care, makes a big difference in the final outcome. And here is a prime example of why I overlap that canvas at the corners and don't miter it. You see, I fold one piece under, and then I fold the other piece, and then fold it again. I know, a lot of folding. But what you end up with is not only a visually clean and appealing corner, but one that's going to be really strong and that's going to resist any wear or tear. And that's the function of overlapping that canvas. And on the back, I'm going to do my usual tidy routine and take some joy in something that most people won't ever see. But I know it's there, and my clients will see it, and I hope when they do, they'll appreciate the care and detail that went into it. Care and detail like matching the radius on the new key with the original key so that it seems to fit more with the originals. Clearly, we know it's not original because it's new wood, but that doesn't mean it has to be such an outlier. The fishing line and the tack just hold these in place because over time wood expands and contracts and these keys can come loose. And while I'm not so concerned that they're lost, I don't want them to fall in between the canvas and the stretcher and create a bulge on the painting. Because there was some paint loss on the front, I need to fill it in with something so I have a suitable substrate for retouching. And here I'm using a chalk-based fill-in medium that I normally use. So it's really not all that difficult. Apply it liberally, let it dry, and then you remove it. So here I'm applying it all over the area in the upper left corner of the sky where the damage was, and I'm not really concerned about how much I apply. Because this is water-based, I can come back and remove anything that I don't like. Remember when I did the little inlay? This is exactly why. You can see how little fill-in medium is actually going to be necessary once it's removed compared to how much was used by the previous conservator. Removing the fill-in is easy. A cotton swab with water, my fingers, my palm, just about anything to get the excess off. And, well, there it is. But take a look at the area where I did the bridging. You see how the putty has gone through the hole and wrapped around the strands of Belgian linen? That's called keying, and it's the same principle as a plaster and lath wall. The plaster or fill-in medium oozes through, wraps around the lath or the strands of linen, and then dries hard in its place. And that keeps it secure. It's not going to flake off or fall out. That's why we leave little gaps when we do bridging. Now, the retouching for this piece looks deceptively simple, right? It's one color, it's the sky, there's not much to recreate, no detail to worry about, but that's actually really, really difficult. In fact, this is one of my least favorite types of retouching. Obviously, a flat blue painting with a big tear is my real least favorite, but this is a close second. Because even though this looks like one color will not cut it. I've mixed maybe 20 or 30 different colors here, and I'm trying to break up the large mass with all of those little colors. Not only am I trying to match what the artist did, trying to carry their color and brushwork through, but I'm also trying to make sure that this retouching doesn't look like a monolith. The whole point of retouching is that you can't see it. It just kind of disappears. And so if you notice it because it's all one uniform color, well, that's just as bad as seeing the damage now, isn't it? If anything takes our focus away from the image, it's a problem. And in this case, I need to make sure that my retouching is varied enough so that not only does it cover the damage, but it doesn't become noticeable. And on an area that's really busy, let's say I had to retouch an area in the foreground with the grass and some of the sheep, that's actually really easy. There's plenty of content there to disguise the retouching. There's enough going on. It's really busy. But where there's not a lot of distraction, where it's really minimal, it's actually really, really hard. Now, I know some Finnish carpenters, and they say when working on old houses with really complex crown molding and baseboards, it's kind of easy if the room is out of square or not perfect, because there's so much going on. You're focused on all the baseboard and the trim work, you don't really see anything that's not quite right. But in a modernist home, where every angle is 90 degrees and there is no ornamentation or detail, well, that gets really hard. Sometimes things that look easy are actually hard. Who'd thunk it? Now, the retouching on this wasn't terribly complicated, and with it complete, I can now move on to the varnishing process, which will give a uniform sheen to the whole painting and get rid of any areas where it's a little bit blotchy or a little bit too shiny, and it will protect the painting. The reason I use this synthetic resin varnish is because it's really easily reversible. Natural resin varnishes are removable with solvent, but the solvents I have to use to remove those will not only remove my retouching, but they can, in some cases, attack the paint layer. The solvent required to remove this does neither, and so it is a superior product for that reason. Small painting, big brush, not a lot of work here, but going back and forth to make sure I have an even distribution of varnish and get rid of any of the brush marks is key. So let's take a look at the painting as it arrived, in its frame. It doesn't look all that bad. In fact, you might think, why would I need to conserve it? Well, this is why. It does look different. But actually, the real reason to conserve this painting is what we can't see. All of the stuff that we saw under blacklight. All of this old, excessive work, multiple rounds of retouching, old varnish that was never cleaned off. And as we see it midway through, well, already there's a big difference. We can see just how excessive it was and how unnecessary. And as we see mine, well, it's radically different. Yes, there's a lot of retouching in the upper left-hand corner, but there was a lot of loss, a lot of damage. But the big difference is that I didn't repaint the sky. I tried to apply paint only where paint was missing. And there is a big difference between what came in and what's going out. WTF no more.